Welcome back to another deep dive into the hidden corners of Tamriel's lore. Tonight, we're exploring something most adventurers never stop to consider as they pick sides in Skyrim's civil war, the intricate machinery of Imperial military command that operates behind every Legion soldier you encounter. We'll be examining the rank structures that govern promotion from auxiliary recruit to general, the fort command systems that maintain Imperial presence across hostile territory, the specialized units and supply chains and intelligence networks that transform individual soldiers into an army, and the countless overlooked details that reveal how the Empire actually functions when stripped of propaganda and viewed through the cold lens of military necessity in a province that may already be lost. The wind howls through the stone corridors of Castle Dour, carrying with it the bite of Skyrim's eternal winter and the weight of an empire struggling to maintain its grip on the north. Within these ancient Nordic walls, repurposed now as the heart of Imperial military operations in Skyrim, the machinery of Legion command continues its relentless turning, indifferent to the cold, to the war, to the dragons that have returned to darken the skies. General Tullius stands before maps marked with the positions of his forces, studying the complex web of command structures that bind together an army fighting on hostile ground, far from the warmth of Cyrodiil and the certainty that once defined Imperial power. The Imperial Legion in Skyrim operates under a hierarchy that stretches from the fresh-faced auxiliary recruits shivering through their first night watch to the general himself, each rank a carefully defined step in a ladder that has been climbed by soldiers for centuries across the breadth of Tamriel. At the bottom, barely considered true legionnaires until they prove themselves, stand the auxiliary recruits, men and women drawn from local populations or volunteers from across the Empire, distinguished by their lack of proper Legion armor and the uncertainty in their eyes. These auxiliaries wear whatever protection they can cobble together, chainmail if they're fortunate, leather and iron if they're not, marked only by a crimson sash or armband that declares their allegiance to the Empire. Their training, conducted primarily at Fort Ragstad on Skyrim's northwestern coast, where the Sea of Ghosts crashes against black rocks, consists of weeks of grueling drill in formation fighting, weapons handling, and the peculiar challenge of learning to fight in Nordic winter conditions that would break southern-born soldiers unaccustomed to frostbite and ice beneath their boots. From auxiliary status, those who survive their first engagements and prove their worth are elevated to the rank of private, receiving their first true set of Imperial armor, that distinctive red and gold that marks a soldier of the Empire. The transformation is more than symbolic. A private has demonstrated competence in combat, loyalty under pressure, and the ability to follow orders when arrows are falling and Stormcloak axes are swinging. They join the regular ranks of Legion infantry, becoming part of the standardized formations that have conquered nations. Though here in Skyrim, those formations break and reform constantly against the irregular warfare tactics of Ulfric's rebellion. The scent of oil used to maintain their armor becomes as familiar as their own sweat, the weight of chainmail and plate a constant companion that pulls at shoulders already aching from long marches through snow that reaches past the knee in the mountain passes between holds. Above the privates stand the corporals, the first taste of command for soldiers who have proven themselves not merely competent but capable of leading others. A corporal typically commands a squad of 8 to 12 soldiers responsible for their discipline, their readiness, their lives. The promotion comes with a subtle change in armor decoration, additional studs, or a modified helm that marks rank at a glance, crucial when orders must flow quickly through the chaos of battle. Corporals learn the delicate balance of maintaining authority while remaining close enough to their soldiers to understand their concerns, their fears, the thousand small problems that can undermine a unit's effectiveness. They coordinate with supply officers to ensure their squads receive rations, with medical personnel when injuries occur, with blacksmiths when weapons need repair. In the confined spaces of Skyrim's ancient forts, Repurposed Nordic strongholds never designed for Imperial occupation. You can often find corporals checking sentry positions as dawn breaks over the throat of the world, their breath misting in air so cold it burns the lungs, ensuring that the soldiers under their command haven't succumbed to the drowsiness that precedes freezing to death at one's post. The rank of sergeant represents a significant leap in responsibility. These veteran soldiers commanding multiple squads and serving as the practical backbone of Legion operations. Sergeants coordinate larger tactical movements, oversee training of junior ranks, and maintain discipline within their companies. They possess the authority to pass judgment on minor infractions, to assign punishments or rewards, to recommend soldiers for promotion, or to block those who haven't earned advancement. In the forts scattered across Skyrim's holds, from Greenwall to Snowhawk to Newgrad, sergeants manage the daily rhythms of garrison life, organizing patrol schedules, coordinating with quartermasters for supply distribution, ensuring that defensive positions remain properly manned, even as soldiers rotate through duties that include everything from wall maintenance to lumber gathering for heating fires that must burn constantly to prevent the cold from claiming as many lives as Stormcloak blades. The sergeants know intimately the peculiar challenges of maintaining military discipline in a province where local sentiment runs against them, where every civilian might be a Stormcloak sympathizer, where the ancient Nordic culture views imperial presence as occupation rather than lawful governance. Lieutenants command the field operations, leading companies of soldiers that might number 50 to 100 depending on garrison strength and current operational needs. These officers receive their commissions through a combination of proven battlefield competence and, in some cases, connections to noble families back in Cyrodiil, though General Tullius has little patience for incompetent aristocrats and has been known to reassign politically appointed lieutenants to positions where they can do minimal damage. A lieutenant must understand not merely tactics but strategy, must coordinate with other companies and with the specialized units attached to Legion forces. They lead patrols through Skyrim's dangerous wilderness, where bandits, wildlife, and Stormcloak ambushes present constant threats, navigate the political complexities of interacting with local jarls whose loyalty to the Empire ranges from genuine to pragmatic to barely concealed hostility, and maintain the morale of soldiers who understand that they're fighting fellow men rather than the clear enemies that previous generations faced in the Oblivion Crisis or the wars against the Aldmeri Dominion. The rank of captain represents command of a fort, one of the crucial strongpoints from which the Legion maintains its presence across Skyrim's 9 holds. Fort commanders answer directly to higher ranks, but exercise significant autonomy in managing their garrisons, responsible for everything from defensive preparations to local intelligence gathering to coordination with nearby settlements. A captain must be diplomat as much as warrior, balancing the military necessity of requisitioning supplies from local farms with the political reality that harsh treatment of civilians drives them into Stormcloak arms. The forts themselves, ancient Nordic constructions of weathered stone that have stood for centuries, present constant maintenance challenges. Walls that crack under the stress of freeze-thaw cycles, wooden structures that rot in Skyrim's damp cold, drainage systems designed by long-dead Nordic engineers that require constant clearing to prevent flooding during spring thaws. Within these forts, captains maintain quarters that reflect their rank but remain Spartanly functional, a desk covered in reports and requisition forms, maps of the local hold marked with patrol routes and known Stormcloak positions, perhaps a few personal items that remind them of Cyrodiil or wherever they call home. Though such sentimentality must be carefully hidden from the soldiers who need to believe their commander is as immovable as the fort's stone walls. Above the captains stand the majors, officers responsible for strategic planning and coordination across multiple forts within a region. These ranks thin considerably as the Legion's presence in Skyrim, stretched by civil war and limited reinforcement from the south, cannot support the elaborate command structures that exist in more secure provinces. Majors spend their time shuttling between Castle Dower and the various forts, carrying orders from General Tullius, gathering intelligence reports, assessing the readiness of garrison forces, and making the difficult decisions about resource allocation when there's never enough to go around. They understand supply lines in ways that junior officers cannot fully grasp, knowing that the convoy that fails to arrive at Fort Sungard doesn't just mean hungry soldiers for a few days, but potentially a fort that cannot hold if the Stormcloaks attack before the next shipment arrives. The burden of command at this level includes signing orders that send soldiers to their deaths, approving missions that have acceptable losses calculated into their planning, and maintaining the fiction that the Empire remains strong even as everyone knows that the Dominion has crippled Imperial power and Skyrim's rebellion is merely a symptom of a deeper Imperial decay. The rank of Colonel, rare enough in peacetime Legion structure, barely exists in Skyrim's reduced command hierarchy, with these positions typically folded into legate responsibilities due to simple necessity. When colonels are present, they manage regional oversight, coordinating operations across multiple holds, serving as the crucial link between General Tullius's provincial command and the individual fort captains who fight the daily ground war. They review intelligence from Penitus Oculatus operatives, those enigmatic agents who replaced the Blades as the Emperor's eyes and ears, coordinate with the specialized units that provide crucial support to standard infantry, and maintain relationships with the political leadership of holds that remain loyal to the Empire, ensuring that Jarls understand their obligations to provide militia support and supplies to Legion forces operating within their territories. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. The legates represent the operational commanders, the officers who translate General Tullius's strategic vision into actionable military operations across Skyrim's fractured landscape. Legate Rikke, the highest-ranking Nord in the Imperial Legion's Skyrim command, embodies the complex position these officers occupy, trusted enough to command thousands, yet never quite escaping the shadow of doubt that comes from being Nordic while fighting against a Nordic rebellion. Legates command entire military campaigns, coordinating the capture of contested forts, planning the sieges that determine which holds fall under Imperial or Stormcloak control, and managing the delicate political theater that accompanies military operations when every battle impacts not just territory but the hearts and minds of civilians watching to see which side appears stronger. Their quarters in Castle Dower reflect the weight of their responsibilities, walls lined with detailed maps showing terrain elevations, resource locations, historical battle sites, and the constantly shifting positions of both Imperial and Stormcloak forces, each marker representing soldiers whose lives hang on decisions made in rooms that smell of parchment, lamp oil, and the faint metallic tang that seems to permeate every military headquarters where men plan death. At the apex stands General Tullius himself, the provincial military governor whose authority in Skyrim is absolute in matters of Legion command, answerable only to the Elder Council and the Emperor far away in the Imperial city. Tullius arrived in Skyrim with a reputation forged in campaigns against the Aldmeri Dominion, a military mind trained in conventional warfare suddenly confronted with an insurgency that refuses to fight by the rules that governed battles in Cyrodiil. His tactical brilliance cannot overcome the fundamental challenge he faces: insufficient forces, unreliable local support, supply lines that stretch impossibly thin across hostile territory, and an enemy led by Ulfric Stormcloak who understands Nordic culture and Skyrim's geography in ways no Cyrodiilic general can match. The general's frustration manifests in the clipped efficiency of his orders, the way he tolerates no incompetence among his officers, the dark circles beneath his eyes that speak of sleep, sacrifice to studying intelligence, reports that never bring good news. He maintains the appearance of imperial invincibility because anything less would shatter the morale of soldiers already questioning why they're fighting fellow men instead of the Thalmor who actually threaten the Empire. The fort command structures that execute Tullius's strategy operate with a standardization that attempts to impose Cyrodiilic order on Nordic chaos. Each fort, whether ancient Hrogstad watching the northern coast or Greenwall commanding the rift's approaches, follows similar organizational patterns despite vast differences in size and strategic importance. Fort commanders receive their appointments based on a combination of seniority, demonstrated competence, and political considerations that Tullius cannot entirely escape despite his preference for meritocracy. A typical garrison might hold anywhere from 50 soldiers in minor outposts to several hundred in major strongholds like Fort Sungard, though these numbers fluctuate constantly as units redeploy to crisis points, casualties thin the ranks, and new recruits arrive from training facilities or transfers from Cyrodiil that come less frequently as the Empire's resources spread thinner across its remaining provinces. Rotation schedules attempt to prevent soldiers from spending too long in the most dangerous or isolated posts, though the realities of civil war mean that rotations often fail to occur on schedule. A soldier might spend months at Fort Kastov overlooking Winterhold's frozen approaches when they were promised transfer after 8 weeks. The delay explained by urgent operational needs or delayed replacements or simply the grinding dysfunction of military bureaucracy operating under wartime stress. Supply officers, typically lieutenants or senior sergeants with aptitude for logistics rather than combat, manage the impossible task of maintaining provisions for their garrisons when supply convoys face constant threat from Stormcloak raiders, bandits who see Legion wagons as opportunities, and the simple challenge of moving goods through Skyrim's terrain where roads become impassable for weeks after heavy snows. These officers maintain detailed ledgers tracking every weapon, every piece of armor, every sack of grain and barrel of salted meat, knowing that discrepancies in their accounts might mean a court-martial if investigators suspect corruption or incompetence rather than the simple reality that supplies disappear to theft, spoilage, or clerical errors that are inevitable when records are maintained by soldiers whose literacy is questionable. The Medical Corps operates with a hybrid structure that combines traditional Legion field medics with restoration mages recruited from Skyrim's small population of Imperial sympathetic spellcasters. Field medics receive training in battlefield triage, wound cleaning, bone setting, and the administration of healing potions whose recipes have been standardized across the Legion for centuries. The scent of these potions, a mixture of honey, lavender, and something sharper that makes the eyes water, becomes associated in soldiers' minds with survival and pain in equal measure. Restoration mages, when available, provide healing that far exceeds what mundane medicine can achieve, closing wounds that would otherwise mean amputation or death, though the Empire's complex relationship with magic means these mages occupy an uncertain position in military hierarchy. They're essential, yet distrusted, respected for their abilities, yet viewed with the suspicion that all mages generate among common soldiers who don't understand the mechanics of magicka. The integration of magical healing with traditional medicine creates tensions in field hospitals established in fort infirmaries, rooms that reek of blood and the acrid smoke from fires that must burn hot enough to sterilize surgical tools, where soldiers scream as healers work, and the distinction between magical and mundane treatment often comes down to simple availability rather than medical philosophy. Communication networks binding the scattered forts represent one of the Legion's greatest challenges in Skyrim. Courier systems employ fast riders who know the roads between holds, carrying sealed messages that might contain anything from routine supply requisitions to urgent warnings of Stormcloak movements. These couriers ride alone or in pairs, targets for anyone who wants to disrupt Imperial communications, their bodies sometimes found frozen in mountain passes or dumped in rivers. The messages they carried vanished into enemy hands. Emergency beacon protocols exist for dire situations, with signal fires that can be lit atop fort walls to warn neighboring positions of attack, though the usefulness of such systems in Skyrim's frequent snowstorms and the vast distances between some forts limits their effectiveness. Coded message systems employ ciphers that change monthly, sheets of seemingly random numbers and letters that become intelligible only when properly decoded, a security measure against the certainty that some messages will be intercepted. The Stormcloaks have their own ciphers, and both sides employ cryptographers who spend their days attempting to break enemy codes while strengthening their own, a shadow war of mathematics and pattern recognition that most soldiers never see. Carrier birds, primarily ravens trained for short-distance messaging between nearby forts, provide faster communication than couriers for urgent but brief messages. The bird handlers, soldiers with the patience for animal training, maintain coops in the forts where ravens roost between flights, their harsh calls echoing from stone towers at dawn and dusk. Magical communication remains largely unavailable to Legion forces in Skyrim, as the scarcity of skilled mages and the unreliability of long-distance magical messaging in a province saturated with ancient Nordic enchantments and the wild magicka surges that have troubled Skyrim since the dragon's return make such methods impractical for routine use. The College of Winterhold possesses the expertise for sophisticated magical communication, but their isolation from imperial politics and their focus on arcane research over practical applications means the Legion cannot rely on them for support. The specialized unit classifications that supplement standard infantry formations represent the Legion's attempt to maintain military versatility despite limited resources. Heavy infantry formations, the core of Imperial tactical doctrine, employ soldiers equipped with the best armor available, tower shields that can form shield walls resistant to arrow volleys, and training in the disciplined formations that have won battles for the Empire since Tiber Septim's conquests. These units excel in set-piece battles on open ground, precisely the type of engagement that the Stormcloaks avoid whenever possible, preferring ambushes and raids that negate the advantages of heavy armor and formal training. Archer auxiliary units, often recruited from Skyrim's indigenous population, particularly Bosmer immigrants who bring their traditional archery skills, provide ranged support that standard Legion training emphasizes less than melee combat. These archers string their bows with waxed cord that resists Skyrim's moisture, the twang of bowstrings and the whistle of arrows in flight becoming familiar sounds during both training and combat. Battlemage attachments, rare and precious, bring offensive magic to supplement conventional weapons. These mages hurl destruction spells that can shatter shield walls, call down lightning that doesn't discriminate between friend and foe in the chaos of battle, or summon creatures from oblivion to fight alongside Imperial forces. The integration of battle mages into infantry units requires careful coordination. A mistimed fireball can incinerate allied soldiers as easily as enemies, and the magicka exhaustion that follows intensive spellcasting can leave a mage helpless if the battle continues beyond their reserves. Scout ranger companies, composed of soldiers with wilderness survival skills and knowledge of Skyrim's geography, operate ahead of main forces, identifying enemy positions, mapping terrain, and occasionally conducting sabotage operations against Stormcloak supply lines. These scouts move through forests where the snow lies undisturbed except for animal tracks, learning to read the land the way Nords have for generations, sleeping in freezing camps where fires would reveal their positions, surviving on dried rations that taste like leather but won't spoil in the cold. Siege Engineer Corps, perhaps the most technical of the specialized units, maintain and operate the siege weapons that prove crucial when assaulting fortified positions. These engineers understand the mathematics of trajectory and counterweight, can assemble a catapult from component parts carried in wagons, know the weak points in Nordic fortification architecture that hasn't changed significantly in centuries. The smell of grease used to lubricate siege equipment's moving parts, the creaking of stressed wood and rope, the devastating crash when a payload of stones strikes a wall, these define the engineer's contribution to warfare. Cavalry squadrons exist in extremely limited numbers in Skyrim, as the province's mountainous terrain and deep snow make mounted combat impractical for most of the year. What cavalry does exist operates primarily as mounted scouts or rapid response forces during summer months when roads become passable, the horses themselves requiring special care to survive Nordic winters that can kill animals not bred for such conditions. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these whispered tales from Tamriel, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Skyrim lores. Recruitment and training reveal the fundamental tensions within the Legion's Skyrim operations, the contradiction between needing local soldiers who understand the terrain and culture while simultaneously distrusting those same soldiers who might harbor sympathies for the rebellion. Local recruitment efforts focus on communities where Imperial loyalty runs strong, or at least stronger than elsewhere. Solitude's urban population benefits from Imperial trade and administrative positions. Certain families in the Reach maintain generations-old connections to Cyrodiilic nobility. Riften's corrupt political machinery sometimes produces recruits seeking escape from the Thieves Guild's dominion or the Blackbriar family's crushing influence. Recruiters, typically sergeants with a talent for persuasive speech, set up stations in taverns and market squares, offering steady pay, regular meals, and the promise of advancement through merit rather than birth, appeals that resonate with young Nords facing limited prospects in a province economically devastated by war. The reality these recruits discover differs sharply from recruitment promises. The pay arrives irregularly when supply convoys are delayed. Meals consist of stale bread and salted fish more often than the hearty fare suggested in enlistment speeches, and advancement requires surviving battles where death comes from axes swung by men who might be cousins or childhood friends from neighboring holds. Transfers from Cyrodiil bring soldiers trained in Imperial Heartland facilities where instructors never had to account for frostbite or the peculiar demoralization that comes from fighting an enemy who speaks the same language and worships the same divines. These Cyrodiilic soldiers arrive in Skyrim unprepared for the cold that sinks into bones despite layers of wool and fur, shocked by the hostility radiating from civilians who view them as occupiers, struggling with Nordic accents so thick that understanding orders becomes a challenge. Basic training at Fort Hragstad attempts to bridge these gaps, drilling recruits in winter survival techniques that Nordic-born soldiers learn in childhood. How to recognize the early signs of frostbite in extremities that lose sensation before visible damage occurs. Methods for maintaining weapons in cold that makes metal brittle and oil sluggish. The crucial importance of keeping feet dry when wet. Boots in freezing temperatures mean amputation or death. The training grounds at Hragstad smell of the sea's salt and the sweat of recruits drilling in armor, the clash of practice weapons echoing off stone walls while instructors shout corrections in voices hoarse from constant use. Specialized training programs exist for soldiers showing aptitude in particular areas, archery instruction for those with steady hands and good vision, basic restoration magic for soldiers with latent magical ability who might serve in medical corps, scout training for those who demonstrate wilderness navigation skills, and the physical endurance for long-range patrols. Veteran retraining addresses the challenge of soldiers whose tactics and assumptions were forged in previous conflicts, suddenly confronting a very different type of war. Veterans of the Great War against the Aldmeri Dominion, those who fought at the Battle of the Red Ring and remember the smell of burning Imperial City, struggle to adapt to counterinsurgency operations where the enemy doesn't wear. Distinctive armor and victories don't come from pitched battles but from slowly winning civilian support in holds where generations of Nordic culture resent Imperial authority. Nordic recruitment challenges extend beyond simple logistics into questions of loyalty and identity, asking Nords to fight other Nords, to potentially kill kinsmen, to choose empire over the independent Skyrim that Ulfric Stormcloak promises to restore. Supply chain management consumes more officer time than actual combat in many forts. The unglamorous reality of maintaining an army in hostile territory where local populations range from reluctant cooperation to active sabotage. Quartermaster hierarchies establish clear chains of responsibility from Castle Dower's central supply depot through regional distribution centers to individual fort stores. each level maintaining records that theoretically allow tracking of every item from manufacture in Cyrodiil through final distribution to soldiers in the field. Supply convoy protection requires dedicating significant combat power to guarding wagons, rather than engaging Stormcloaks, soldiers who join to fight instead spending weeks walking beside creaking carts, watching tree lines for ambushes, sleeping in roadside camps where the sound of approaching footsteps might mean relief forces or raiders. The convoys themselves represent tempting targets, weapons, armor, food, medical supplies, all the material an insurgency needs but cannot easily manufacture or purchase, all vulnerable during the days or weeks of travel between secure locations. Local requisition protocols allow fort commanders to purchase or sometimes simply seize supplies from nearby settlements, a practice that breeds resentment even when commanders try to pay fair prices that civilians know represent official valuations rather than market rates. A farmer watches Legion soldiers load grain he needs to survive winter, accepting script that promises payment from Imperial coffers that may or may not honor the debt. Understanding that refusal means classification as a Stormcloak sympathizer with all the dangers that entails. Weapons and armor distribution follows strict protocols meant to prevent theft and ensure accountability, with armories in each fort supervised by dedicated supply sergeants who sign out every sword, every helmet, maintaining ledgers that track which soldier carries which equipment. The practical reality sees equipment shared between soldiers of similar size, battlefield salvage integrated into official stocks without proper documentation, and the constant repairs necessary when armor takes damage in combat or simply wears from use in conditions that stress metal and leather beyond design specifications. Food procurement systems struggle against Skyrim's limited agricultural output and the disruption civil war inflicts on normal trade patterns. Quartermasters purchase salted meat, dried fish, grain, vegetables that store through winter, establishing contracts with merchants who navigate the complex politics of profiting from both sides while trying to avoid accusations of collaboration. The food served in fort mess halls reflects these constraints: porridge that's more water than grain, stews where unidentifiable meat floats in broth flavored with whatever herbs the cook could forage, bread that's often more sawdust than flour when grain runs short. Soldiers learn to supplement official rations through hunting when patrol duties allow, setting snares for rabbits and ptarmigan, fishing through ice in frozen streams, gathering what edible plants survive Nordic winters. Winter supply challenges intensify every problem. Roads become impassable. Frozen waterways cannot support boat traffic. Animals hunted for meat grow scarce or hibernate, and the sheer quantity of fuel needed to heat fort buildings consumes storage space that might otherwise hold food or military supplies. Intelligence operations weave through Legion activities like threads through cloth, visible only when examined closely, essential to the structure's integrity. Penitus Oculatus coordination brings the Emperor's personal intelligence service into contact with military intelligence, a relationship marked by mutual necessity and mutual distrust. The Penitus Oculatus, secretive agents who replaced the disbanded Blades after the Great War, pursue their own objectives that sometimes align with Legion needs and sometimes diverge, their operatives appearing in forts with credentials that demand cooperation without explaining their purposes. Local informant networks recruit civilians willing to report Stormcloak activities, paid in coin or promises of future favor, risking brutal execution if discovered by the rebellion's own counterintelligence forces. These informants pass messages through dead drops in cities and towns, coded notes left in hollow trees or beneath specific stones in city walls, information that might reveal troop movements or supply caches, or simply confirm which merchants sell to the Stormcloaks. Stormcloak infiltration attempts target Legion forts constantly, sympathizers seeking positions as civilian workers who maintain fort buildings or supply Legion kitchens, actual spies who enlist as soldiers and feed information to rebellion commanders. Counterintelligence procedures include background investigations of recruits when time permits, surveillance of soldiers whose loyalty seems questionable, controlled information distribution that limits what any single soldier knows about broader strategic plans. Strategic intelligence gathering employs scouts who observe Stormcloak-held forts from concealed positions, documenting patrol patterns and defensive preparations, counting soldiers visible on walls, noting the arrival and departure of supply wagons. This information flows up the command chain through written reports that officers compile, analyze, and forward, each level adding interpretation until raw observations transform into strategic assessments that guide General Tullius's planning. Prison and detention systems occupy uncomfortable space in Legion operations, as the Civil War creates categories of captives that traditional military justice wasn't designed to handle. Prisoner of war protocols theoretically govern treatment of captured Stormcloaks, Geneva Convention-style rules that require humane treatment, proper feeding, protection from torture, though the fiction that this is a rebellion rather than a true war creates legal ambiguities that some Legion officers exploit. Criminal transfers to Legion custody occur when local hold guards capture bandits or murderers in areas under Imperial military administration. These prisoners handed to Legion authority that may or may not process them through proper judicial channels. Execution authorities rest with General Tullius for major cases and with individual fort commanders for lesser offenses, the power to order death delivered by sword or arrow or hanging rope, decisions that should follow military law but in practice often reflect expediency and political consideration. The prisoners themselves occupy cells that were never designed for long-term detention, Nordic dungeons built to hold criminals briefly before execution or transport, now crowded with Stormcloaks awaiting exchange or men accused of desertion awaiting trial. Prisoner exchange negotiations represent rare moments of formal contact between Legion and Stormcloak leadership, mediated meetings where lists of names are traded, arguments conducted over relative ranks and value, agreements reached that might see a captured Stormcloak officer returned for several Legion privates. Labor camp management, though not officially acknowledged, sees prisoners employed in work details that serve military purposes, repairing fortifications, cutting timber, hauling supplies, under guard by soldiers who understand that escape attempts are common and that the line between legitimate prisoner employment and slavery grows thin in practice. Disciplinary systems maintain order within Legion ranks through graduated responses to infractions ranging from minor breaches of protocol to serious crimes. Court-martial procedures, formalized in Legion regulations dating back centuries, require convening panels of officers to hear evidence, determine guilt, and assign punishment for serious offenses like desertion, theft of military property, insubordination that threatens operational security, or violence against superior officers. The proceedings occur in fort halls or castle dower chambers, the accused standing before officers who hold authority over life and death, witnesses providing testimony, evidence presented and challenged. Punishment protocols include confinement, reduction in rank, flogging for serious but non-capital offenses, and execution for the gravest crimes. The crack of a whip against a soldier's back serves multiple purposes. Punishment for the individual, deterrent for others who witness, demonstration that Legion discipline remains intact even in the chaos of civil war. Desertion responses reflect the particular challenges of an army fighting far from home in hostile territory, where slipping away into civilian populations requires simply discarding armor and walking away. Deserters who are caught face execution, bodies left hanging from fort walls or crossroads gallows as warnings, though many escape and vanish into Skyrim's vastness, or even join the Stormcloaks where former Legion training makes them valuable recruits. Morale management techniques attempt to prevent the conditions that breed desertion, Officers maintain regular contact with their soldiers, celebrate victories however minor, ensure that pay arrives when possible, grant leave to men who need rest, and most importantly, convince soldiers that their sacrifices serve purposes larger than General Tullius's career ambitions or the Elder Council's political calculations. The integration with local forces creates complex relationships where military necessity demands cooperation with indigenous power structures that the empire theoretically supersedes. Jarl's guard coordination occurs in holds that remain loyal to the empire, arrangements where the hold guards commanded by Jarls theoretically supplement legion forces, but in practice pursue their own priorities under commanders who answer to political rather than military authority. Hold militia cooperation becomes crucial during major operations, as the legion's limited numbers cannot garrison every town and patrol every road, requiring reliance on civilian defense forces of uncertain training and commitment. Mercenary auxiliary contracts bring professional fighters into legion service. Bands like the Companions, theoretically available though their complex honor codes make them unreliable for missions that require moral flexibility, individual sellswords and small companies hired to guard supply convoys or hold minor positions that free legion regulars for combat duties. The machinery of imperial military power in Skyrim grinds onward through winter nights and dragon-haunted skies, maintained by soldiers who understand they're fighting for an empire that may already be dying, that the Aldmeri Dominion has won without needing to conquer, that Skyrim's rebellion is merely symptom of decay that runs deeper than any single province. Yet they continue because orders continue, because the alternative to order is chaos, because some still believe that the empire represents civilization against barbarity, even as the definitions of those terms blur beyond recognition. In the forts scattered across Skyrim's 9 holds, in Castle Dour, where General Tullius studies his maps, in the training yards where new recruits learn to fight, and the hospitals where healers tend the wounded, the Imperial Legion maintains its presence through sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge the possibility of defeat, the characteristic imperial conviction that will and organization can overcome any obstacle, even when history whispers that empires like men eventually fall.